Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all, wherever you may be. I'm excited to be here today talking to you about relevance. In this case, thinking about how we can stay relevant for a more modern world. And in doing that, sort of thinking about how we might think about creativity and in turn opening up the aperture in the definition of what that means. For context, before just diving in, I wanted to give it a little bit of context and introduction to my background, because it does set some context around sort of my perspective, I guess. I've spent my career focused around design and creativity. A designer by trade. I went to design school, and that sort of took me on a path to the worlds of like advertising, so thinking about TV spots, more marketing, more communication focused work, activations and experiences, and then also to the world of product and services through working with Nike and Apple and their partnership through products like Fuel Band and the Apple Watch, and then also working with the likes of Oprah Winfrey and really thinking about her brand and thinking about her book club more specifically, and how brand can inform how brands show up in this world and how brand design can really affect and influence a brand. And anything in between, digital experiences, augmented reality, new technologies and spaces as well. So I've found that I've got a somewhat unique experience that design has taken me on, and that's definitely informed my perspective and on creativity and the role of it. So a couple of things I really wanted to unpack today as part of this story was thinking about the broader canvas, like really looking at where creativity can live today beyond just traditional channels. And the second piece of it, really thinking about how we as a community of creatives or as an industry can come together about a common understanding and definition really of what makes great work versus subpar work or just good work. So diving in, really thinking about, as I was thinking about this, the last couple of years have really been challenging to say the least. I know we've all gone through a myriad of change. We've all been disrupted from our daily lives to our work lives and anything in between. And it's really sort of shaped how we as a generation or as people in general live and behave. And I think, creativity's no different. Creativity has changed, and I think we're in a moment where creativity is being looked upon to help solve some of the challenges, to be frank, that we're facing today. So the role of creativity really has evolved over the last couple of years specifically. However, I do believe that creativity has been evolving for quite some time. I would say pre-pandemic times, the last 10 to 15 years, there's been this real acceleration in the role of creativity and the sort of broader challenges that creativity and creative thinking can solve in the world beyond just marketing or product challenges, but thinking about the world at large. And so when you think about our industry, there's a giant piece of our industry that's still built around these very traditional behaviors, and that was born from the technology and the media landscape of the day. So newspapers, radio was a channel, TVs came online, and these behaviors, these human behaviors, were really born from that media and technology landscape, and that was sort of formed the basis really of how we think about modern creativity. But as we know, technology, the media landscape has really boomed in the last couple of years, but more specifically over the last 10 to 20 years of really evolving human behaviors, the way we engage with ourselves, with the world around us, with brands especially, has really changed how we show up and how we behave. And in addition to that, like I keep saying, the last couple of years has really shaped who we are as people, but more specifically how it's evolved and shaped our behaviors, how we engage with each other, how we engage with the world around us, and also how we've engaged with brands as well. So the world at large has really had an impact on how we show up and how we engage with the world. So of course we're still reading things and we're listening to things and we're watching things, of course. We might be doing them in new ways. We may be doing them in the traditional ways of a book, or it might be reading an iPad or a digital channel, but we're still doing these core behaviors. But in addition to these core behaviors, the myriad of behaviors that people are doing and being a part of has really exploded. So this is just a small snapshot of just some of the things that people are spending a lot of time doing. This isn't just every now and then. People are spending hours, if not longer, engaging with each other with brands, with the world around them, the way they live their lives, the way they do their work, is sort of exploded in terms of the behaviors that we exhibit and that we engage with on a daily basis. And that human behavior has really evolved broadly, but it's also meant that the way brands to remain relevant, brands have really played catch up to remain relevant and to chase those new behaviors and understand those new behaviors to really show up in a meaningful way for people. And so, in essence, as an industry, as a creative industry, our remit, or our creative canvas, if you will, has really expanded. So that that notion of where we create work, or where our work lives in the world, has really changed. It's really expanded beyond just those traditional channels of TV, print, radio. And so we've really got to think about where and how our work's ultimately going to live for us to be successful and also to remain relevant. And so, it still does include advertising. I've heard the narrative that advertising's dead. I've heard the narrative that advertising's dying. I think it's here to stay. I think what it looks like and how it shows up can be very different and will probably evolve as we move forward. But thinking about that as one piece of the puzzle is sort of what I wanted to unpack here. Really thinking about what the brand says, the message that it puts out into the world, how it goes to market to really capture people's imagination and inspire them, and thinking about ultimately the promise that it puts out there and the message that it says in the world. But there's more than just advertising. To really remain relevant or stay relevant in today's evolving landscape, it requires more than just advertising. So hence the advertising really is just one piece of the puzzle. Another piece is really thinking about the products and the services that a brand puts out into the world. This is probably the purest form of expression of the brand. I think this is the tangible things that people can engage with in the world, the things that people sort of buy or they purchase or they subscribe to, and the things that really is the interface between people and brands. And then the third and last piece is really thinking about the relationship that people have with brands these days. This isn't something that was probably around 10, 15, 20 years ago. It's relatively new, but the notion that people have this ongoing relationship with brands is something that we should and could be thinking about in a more consistent way. So thinking about subscription models, thinking about ways that brands can be loyal to you as much as you are loyal to them. And so thinking about this world of this ongoing relationship is another piece of the puzzle that I think is relevant to brands to really remain relevant in today's world and to maintain that connection with their most avid consumers. So these worlds are not necessarily new. Some are more recent than others, but I think these worlds have for too long been disconnected from each other. They've been siloed. I think that's probably a product of the way organizations and brands internally have been structured and organized themselves, and in turn agencies and creative organizations that sort of work in these fields have distanced themselves from each other. They've sort of specialized into these worlds, and they haven't really integrated as much as they could or they should have based on those sort of internal brand structures as well. And I think there's a real opportunity as we look to the future, and again, thinking about how this, we can sort of inform or improve the way we think about how brands and how people engage with those brands in a more consistent way, in a more valuable way, in a more relevant way, is to think about connecting these worlds of advertising and all the pieces that go within that. The world of the products and the services that live in the world, and how we can include that into the thinking, and the world of relationship, this sort of ongoing connection to a consumer, and thinking about how these pieces relate to each other, but also connect with each other as well. And I think this is the sort of future of how we think about a connected ecosystem of a brand. And so, when we think about that, the role of the brand really sits at the center of this to really inform this entire ecosystem, understanding the brand, thinking about the brand's core DNA, the value proposition, the tone of voice, the look and the feel of the brand. All of that sort of should sit center and at the heart of the brand, which should inform this entire ecosystem and this entire journey. And so, this is really, like I mentioned, this is really reflective of a modern day journey. When you think of this, It's really an evolution, if you want to think of it the way of an evolution of a traditional marketing funnel. So thinking about this landscape or this ecosystem, if you will, as an ongoing journey that consumers have with brands today. So, the traditional model is there's a natural starting point of marketing or awareness, and then you're driving people through the funnel to a point of purchase or a point of transaction. And this is taking that notion and going beyond that, thinking beyond the point of purchase, thinking beyond the point of transaction and conversion, that it actually goes into an ongoing relationship. And that relationship and that information, how you use the products and services, whether you like the advertising, whether you responded to it, whether you didn't respond to it, whether you love the product and the service, whether you hate it, whether you've left a review, whether you haven't, all of that information should go in to form an ongoing relationship with consumers that ultimately goes round to inform more meaningful, more relevant communication from brands. And so there's a sort of a natural journey that people go on here with brands today that doesn't have a natural start and an end. It may be the product and service is the starting point. And so it doesn't have this natural start and end. It has a very organic flow to it, and it enables us to think about engaging with people beyond just getting them to purchase something or to transact. The other reason of connecting these worlds is creatively, and maybe selfishly as a creative myself, thinking about these moments of intersection or these points of intersection between these worlds. I think of pure advertising, I think of pure CRM, loyalty, relationship type work, and I think of the pure product and service creation worlds as essential. But there is this really interesting moment where when we blend these worlds, you get these really interesting creative territories and intersections. This intersectional thinking is sort of spawns these super interesting creative opportunities for us, that those pieces of work that we've all seen that is part communication, it's somewhat of an experience, it's got commerce baked into it. These worlds actually allow sort of multidimensional thinking or intersectional thinking to unlock these creative opportunities for us as an industry to really serve brands and show up in ways that are meaningful for brands, but also for people as they engage with brands in meaningful ways. And this is what at TBWA we call the disruptive brand experience. Again, we always start with the brand, deep understanding of the brand, the business, how it shows up, the tone of voice, the look and the feel, the core essence of the brand, the DNA, the strategy, the whole reason of its existence. And then we go out to this broader landscape beyond just traditional marketing or advertising channels. We think about the ecosystem products and services they might have. We think about the desired outcomes and the long-term relationships that brands may have with consumers. And so what we want to do is include that in the thinking and think about this broader landscape. And so that's really the first piece of this. I really wanted to just take a moment to just define the landscape of creativity today from a modern brand perspective, I would say, to just think about the different aspects and elements of creativity and where our work and our thinking can show up in the world. So the second piece really is as an industry, thinking about that with that landscape as a backdrop. How do we come together in the spirit of bringing us together around some common understanding and common vernacular? How do we come together around a common understanding of what makes great work versus just good work? So again, with that broader landscape as a backdrop, we're going to need different sets of thinkers coming to our industry, to the world, to think about some of the challenges, some of the problems from a brand and just a general world at large perspective. And so as they come together, there's natural sort of fragmentation that happens. Different people have different ways of thinking or different sort of approaches, or they'll over-index on prioritizing one aspect of the thinking. And I think with these varying perspectives that we all need and we need in the mix, how do we establish a common and holistic view of creativity and creative work to all come together and have a common understanding? Of course, we'll have our different ways of and areas of expertise, but how do we come together around a common understanding and a common goal? And so, while we like to call out differences between designers or art directors or writers or creative technologists or strategists, there's natural differences, of course. We have our different skill sets, we have our different crafts and ways of thinking. But when you boil it all down, we do have a lot in common. We are more alike than we are different. And I think one of the things that binds us, there's a number of things, but I think one of those things is really thinking about how we're all striving to create great work, whether you're a business consultant, you're a strategist, you're a designer, you're a writer. Everyone wants to create great work and they want to see it live in the world. So unpacking that, the natural question is, but what does make great work? What is great work? What's the definition of great work? And I think if we were to ask 10 people in our industry what makes great work, you'd probably get 10 different answers. And that's what a little bit of the provocation or question here and the challenge I gave myself and our teams was to really think about defining what is great work at the end of the day. And I think the short answer is great work is relevant work. It's showing up in a relevant way. But I think there's a few dimensions of relevance that I wanted to unpack today. And I think it's being relevant for a few aspects. And there's sort of 4 dimensions that I've unpacked here. The first one is really being relevant for the brand. So thinking about how it's distinct, how it's taking the brand truth, the DNA of the brand, pulling that through into the work that ultimately lives in the world. Showing up in a way that stands out from the crowd, it stands out from the sea of sameness, and it's creating things that live in the world to help a brand stand out. The second one is about being relevant for people. So really understanding people and their behaviors, what makes them tick, what's tapping into a need or a desire or a need state of people in general. And I think, again, these dimensions are meant to be universal, right? So they're not meant to be just focused on TV creativity or media creativity or just product and service. These are meant to be universal. So whether you're looking at a 30-second TV spot or you're looking at a new product or service that might be being designed, I think these are dimensions that we can use to evaluate that. And being relevant for people could be just making people laugh. This is a desire that people have. They want to be entertained. They want to feel something. They want to cry. They want to laugh. So tapping into human emotions is one piece of this. So making sure that there's an attractive quality from a human perspective to the work that we're creating, and there's a natural desire to want to download it, watch it, share it, use it, buy it, whatever it might be. So having that human desirable quality is a key piece to being relevant for people. The third one is really thinking about culture and being relevant for culture and having an awareness of the work. So making sure that we're creating work that's not tone deaf, that it's taking into account what's going on in the world, whether that be the world of banking, if you're working with a bank as a client, as an example. So making sure that you understand what it means to put a piece of work or a product into the world, in the world of banking. What does that look like? What does that mean? How do people engage in that world? What does that look like in terms of a community? When you're putting things into the world, in a location, into a town, into a country, do you understand the nuances of culture within that location, within those communities? And is it taking those into account into the thinking for that work? And then on the grandest scale of all, like, is it taking into account and is it aware of what's going on in the world? So is it taking into account that there's a war going on in the Ukraine, and is it showing up in a way that's relevant and taking into account things like that, or that we're in the midst of a environmental crisis and that's been on our hands for a while? Like, are we taking into account we're not creating things that are adding to these problems, and we're at least aware of these things in the thinking as well? So culture means many things. It's obviously a loaded term and probably overused at times, but thinking about the different altitudes of culture from a category to a community and all the way to a global level. And then last but not least, making sure that the work we create is really relevant for the business that we're working with. It's got an intention behind it, that it has a goal, it has a purpose. It's thinking about what it's striving to do, whether that's tackling a business challenge that the business may be facing, understanding why the work is being created at the business level. It may be taking on a challenge that they're facing. It may be tapping into and unlocking an opportunity that they see. So making sure that we've got an intent behind our work. And great work is really the work that's relevant, and it's tapping into that intent and delivering on that with real impact. And so just to recap those 4 dimensions, I think it is great work is relevant, but I think it's relevant for a few dimensions of the world. And I think part of it is thinking about being distinct for the brand, being desirable for people, being aware of culture and what's going on in the world, and having an impact at the business level. I think these are the dimensions where it's what we can strive for. And again, These are designed and have been put together with the idea that they can be universal. Again, looking at a 30-second TV spot, or thinking about a membership program, or it could be looking at an outdoor piece of advertising. So we can evaluate these types of work, or a product or service, and we can look at these through some objective dimensions that really start to get to the core of what makes great work versus just good work. And clicking into that just for 1 minute, I think there's some tangible things that we can give our teams. We can ask ourselves every day. We can ask it from the brand side, from a creative agency side, thinking about the work that we create, and really thinking about those moments, whether it's the first time you're seeing ideas, or it's about to, you're about to hit the go live button on a piece of work, or whatever it is. Really asking yourselves throughout the creative process, from a brand perspective, really thinking about, is this ownable? Does this really help us stand out from the crowd or the sea of sameness and feel distinct in the world and true to our brand? Is this work meaningful from a people perspective? Do people want this? Do they desire this? Is there a behavior that we're tapping into, or a human insight that people are going to care and really want this to live in the world? And from an awareness, a culture perspective, thinking about awareness, and are we paying attention? Is this work tone deaf, or is it really paying attention and taking into account all the things that are going on in the world? And then finally, understanding the business. I can't stress this enough. Just understanding the core intent from a business perspective is really delivering work that's not just hot air. It's not just frivolous work, that it's really delivering real impact for businesses, and how they can be, delivering, tackling a challenge, or tapping into an opportunity from their perspective as well. So these are just some questions that teams, we can use these to ask ourselves along the way, but really thinking about how this can be used beyond just being a theoretical thing, how it really can be used. And so to recap, just thinking about staying relevant in today's world, I do think it requires some considerations around a few things. The first is that world of evolved behaviors. I think the world of the way people engage in the world around us has evolved to encompass a whole host of behaviors that we can and should be designing for. The world of where the work ultimately lives in the world is expanded beyond just the traditional channels of advertising and media, but it's gone into products and services, and thinking about how brands can have ongoing relationships. And then finally, that sort of in the spirit of bringing people together around some common dimensions of understanding work, thinking about a holistic approach that we can all get around to break down the mystery, I guess, or to demystify creativity and get to some tangible things that we can look at and evaluate work through. So I want to thank you for your time today. I'm looking forward to any conversations and questions that you may have. Thank you.
So let's go through some of the questions. So first one is from Catherine McPherson, who asks, in your view, does the structure of traditional creative studio need to evolve? And do you have any examples of any of that having been done successfully?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think from a creative standpoint, I think what's needed is this sort of opening up the aperture, just like I said in the presentation, is sort of looking at the disciplines too, the traditional structures being, again, from a creative standpoint, art and copy seems to be, was the sort of traditional model that was built around, again, those existing or traditional behaviors. And I think now we're looking at studios or creative teams that need to encompass, brand and visual design, art direction, copywriting is still in there for sure, but, thinking about experience design, creative technologists that start to blend and blur the lines between creativity and technology as well. So I think just opening up that aperture on the creative department itself and embracing different skill sets and different crafts. I sort of reference the Bauhaus kind of model. I think, I think many studios and many agencies are trying to find the balance or find ways to bring in different thinkers. And I think, I reference Bauhaus, and I think you can probably see the book over my shoulder. I'm sort of a fan of the Bauhaus kind of model, which was really just about, there's different specialists and different skills, but there's also that sort of a hybrid model. And how do you find the hybrid thinkers and bring them? So you have these hybrid thinkers that can blur the lines between traditional types of creatives, if you will, but then also allow and give room to specialists as well.
Amazing, and you're absolutely right. Bringing in different thoughts and different skill sets absolutely makes a difference. So thank you for that. Next question is from Josephine Bias, who asks, Ben, how important do you believe it is for brands to have a war room or strategy to deal with the always-on world of the instant consumer reaction? So for example, should the brand happen to experience a crisis of trust? And again, how important is it to have this war room or strategy to deal with all of these issues?
Sorry, it was sort of breaking up. Can you repeat that question? Sorry.
Yes. The question is, how important do you believe it is for brands to have a war room or strategy to deal with the always-on world of the instant consumer reaction? As an example, should the brand happen to experience a crisis of trust where there's an issue, what should the brand be doing to ensure that it's able to deal with this?
Yeah, I think just having the sort of traditional model is to have the sort of the cadence and the calendar of the plan, and you've got a plan. But like you said, there's a response that's needed these days where you just have to have that always-on team that's ready to evolve or ready to react at any moment. And so I think having almost like two streams of the creative and strategy, and almost like you've got an always-on layer to the team or the working team. So you've got this sort of response mechanism built in to the structure, and then you've got your sort of day-to-day that's sort of still planning for the future and things like that. But I think that's probably the biggest thing that agencies and what I've seen in the creative space of just that evolution that's needed to just be able to respond real time to things that are going on in the world. I think that the speed that culture works at and the speed that the world is evolving is like nothing we've ever seen before. And so I think creative teams are needing to evolve, and strategic teams, and just teams in general are needing to evolve to be that always on. So I think just having, almost like an A team and a B team, or a team A, team B to tackle things in real time, and then the other team making sure that the lights stay on and making sure that the business objectives are met for 6 months, 12 months down the road. And so thinking of it in two types of teams, if you will.
Amazing. That makes sense. Always on for the always on consumer, and you need to meet them where the consumer is. On to our next question. So Ben, do you have a recipe to successfully integrate products, relationships, and advertising? And this comes from Anita Robbenheimer.
Sorry, what was the question again?
Yes, so Anita Robbenheimer asked, do you have a recipe to successfully integrate products, relationships, and advertising?
Yeah, again, a good question, and one that I get asked quite often, actually. And I think, like I said, those worlds have traditionally been separated. And so the challenge is, how do we bring those worlds together? And I think what I've seen work pretty well or really well is establishing a team that's almost like an integration layer, if that makes sense. So you keep your structures and you keep your specialists that are deep experts in advertising, deep experts in product and service, but you have a layer or an integration team that can be really small too. It can be as small as one person or two people that understand the nuances within each of those worlds and is able to connect the thinking and connect the dots in terms of like a larger sort of, a clicked out view or a holistic view of what those worlds are each doing and the value that each one's providing. So I think, establishing an integration team or establishing specialists or people within each of those worlds that can act as that integration team, I've seen work really, really well. And so case in point, working with Nike for many years, Nike have a traditional and a very famous kind of very vertically sectioned out sort of organizational structure. And I think that they're establishing teams that sort of are horizontals across those pillars and sort of enable thinking and business objectives to be met by integrating some of those teams and different thinkers along the way.
Fantastic. And moving on quickly, just in the interest of time, Jackie Oates asks, in my experience, one thing you'll never struggle with is an agency's desire to evolve and change. Yet, meaningful change is often slow to come. What, in your view, are the barriers preventing this?
The biggest barriers, I think, what I've seen is the existing structures and the business models. I think the way agencies, at least in the creative world, I think agencies and the way they've made money in the past is probably the biggest barrier. The sort of the aversion to moving away from anything that sort of made them money in the past and made agencies money in the past. And so again, it's not about walking away from that. It's about understanding different models and different structures that could be integrated into the way the business is run. I think that's the first one. And then the second one is behavior. I think another barrier is just traditional behaviors and habits of people in general. So I think, that's where the common understanding or definition of creativity, I'm trying to get to a place where we can all, from all walks of life and all walks of creatives, if you think of, how do we get to some common understanding and definitions? I think those behaviors start to change when people have a common vernacular or a common understanding around something. They can gather around the same table and have a common conversation. So I think it's two parts. It's the structures of the businesses and the agencies that we've worked in the past and the way they've made money historically. I think that's one thing that needs to evolve. But then beyond that, it's the people that you put into those structures, the people and the way they think about what we create and all the facets of it and the different types of it. And thinking about that is another thing. And that's where the four dimensions of what gets to great work is starting to tackle or chip away at getting to some common understanding.
Amazing. Ben, thank you so much for making the time to be with us here today. Really appreciate all the insights and taking all of these questions as well. And and appreciate all the work you do for creative excellence in our industry. So thank you so much.
Great.
Amazing.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.